You joined the city council last year, and now you are running for state senate. So I guess a couple of things. One is, would you be planning to stay with the council should you be elected to the senate? And second, do you feel like a year on the council has prepared you for that kind of legislative role?
Sure. Let me give you a couple of answers to that question. First off, my background is 43 years working in the public sector with constituent advocacy, primarily around higher education, but not exclusively. I've served in citizen leadership roles where I helped form the court-appointed special advocates office in southwestern New Hampshire. I've led the Chamber of Commerce and developed the workforce coordinator position during my time there. In that role, I chaired the Monadnock Economic Development Corporation and helped bring businesses and leverage the incentives that we could bring to this area. I've chaired the Cheshire Medical Center Board at a time when we were thinking and actually getting into the agreement with the Dartmouth-Hitchcock system to form a tighter affiliation to preserve the access and to build a tighter healthcare delivery system for this area. My roles in higher education have been in public finance, and I have formed through that, as well as in planning, and more generally. I have formed relationships with people throughout the nation as a result of it, some of them global, and held leadership roles with both the college and university business officers and the Society for College and University Planning on their national boards. That's all to say that I have been involved in a range of issues that are all in the public sector, that require the collaboration of government, education, business, and the not-for-profit sectors. And I have constantly, over that 43-year period, brought those parties together for solutions, to solve problems. And for 28 years, I've been able to do that here in the Monadnock region through my position at Keene State College. When I saw that I was going to retire in January, 20 years ago, Pat Russell put a seed in my head. There was a vacancy on the city council, and she said, I want you to apply for that vacancy. And I thought about it. Doc Y and I spoke about it, and the then president of Keene State College, and we determined there's just a conflict of interest here. There's no way to resolve that, and this is not the right time. But the seed was planted, and I give Pat a lot of credit. And before she passed away, I spent some time over at the Woodward and reflected with her that it's your fault that I got into this. You never know how a college official is going to play in the community. We've had some conflicts in the last few years where the college has risen on in the community's attention to how we connect with the community and work better together. I wasn't sure how that election was going to go, but there were 16 candidates for at-large positions, and I was the top vote getter. That was good for me. I was satisfied with that being my public role, and that I would continue with the adjunct faculty role with the management department at Keene State College, and I'd start to redefine myself. But when Molly Kelly decided to not run, I was approached by a lot of people in the community that I should take an interest in this race, that I would be perfect for the role. And that I started to think about it. Initially, I resisted it, and suddenly I came to a place of seeing I can make a difference. And that's what I want to do. It's what has defined me throughout my career and throughout my life. I am the son of immigrant parents, and the notion of continuing to work hard and do things that help people has just been, and it's why I'm here. It's why they were here in this country, and it's what we need to do in a democracy to be participants and to help lift all citizens. That's what I want to do, and I think I can be the most effective leader in this region to do that. And specific to your question about would I serve in multiple roles, I believe that there are always conflicts of interest between governing bodies. You can see that between the school board and the city, that one is pointing at the other about the tax rate, the property tax rate, and their behavior towards it. You can see it between what the state's jurisdictions are and what it allows the city to do, and what it holds back as to what only the state can do. We don't have local control laws in this state. So I would not serve in both roles. I would need to serve out the year, but I would not create the conflict of interest.
Okay. And so as if you move on to the role as a state senator for the region, what would your main focus be? What are what are your legislative priorities to things that you would like to address?
The primary to my attention is the economy, jobs, workforce, education, and the infrastructure that we need to create a healthier economy in the state and here in the Monadnock region. We have a lot of dots to connect in order for that to occur. If we do nothing, our population will decrease by 10%, and our retired population, or people over 65 by the year 2030, will comprise nearly 30% of the total population. You can see the dynamics here. We have an aging and retiring workforce. So not only do we have the desire to attract more commerce and business and economic activity into this region, but we've got to work hard to retain the assets that we have that are fundamental to the economy in this region. But there are so many ways in which we've got to do this better. Let me give you some other statistics on this. The manufacturing and computer information technologies in this state comprise about 100,000 jobs on a base that's around 700,000 total. Every quarter, 3,000 job openings are advertised. 2,000 of them get filled. You can do the math. That does not make for sustaining the industry, the business, the commerce that we've got in this region. So we've got to start connecting this. Innovators seek innovative places to live. We have got to become known and branded and begin to put the infrastructure behind being an innovative part of the state. I think it's possible. The average size of a Chamber of Commerce firm, Chamber of Commerce member, I'm sorry, hold it, it's not the average. The median size of a Chamber of Commerce member in this region is a business that has 4 employees. We are a place where cottage industries grow out of homes, into incubators, into businesses, and then we've got to make sure that they have the capability and the workforce available to them and the infrastructure with internet bandwidths and speeds that allow for them to do business here in this beautiful part of the world. That's exceptional. where this community spirit is so strong that you can have this lifestyle and be able to be competitive with your competition in much bigger cities. And that's what we've got to do. And it's not just manufacturing in that is part of that median type firm in this in this region. It's the creative arts and home businesses that people with good ideas that need the tools to be successful here, and we've got to build that infrastructure. Part of this is schools. Let's take healthcare as another sector. And actually, I am going to stay on the manufacturing industries because here my record is really strong. I helped create the first internet business in this region over 20 years ago, Monadnet. We were going to be bypassed on that information highway, and that wasn't good enough for the businesses and schools and hospitals in this region. So I was asked to lead that effort together with George Scott. I helped create the Regional Center for Advanced Manufacturing. It is a statewide model for getting all parties to collaborate to fill a void, a need. We did that by bringing together business, not-for-profit entities like the Chamber of Commerce, the educational institutions, including River Valley, SAU 29 and the Career Center, Keene State College, and a wide sector of business representation. And the number of offerings through apprenticeship programs and dual credit programs at the Career Center, the offerings for Work Ready and through the TAC grant through River Valley Community College, and the offerings through the Advanced Manufacturing program at Keene State College, where we built a new facility, Technology Design and Safety Center, which was just perfectly timed to begin to produce the kind of workforce for that advanced manufacturing industries that right now is filling positions from Milford to Charlestown, from Hitchner Manufacturing to Wayland to Markham, to small businesses here in the Cheshire County area. And yes, they're going outside of the region as well, but we're increasing the pool, the talent pool available. And so then I wanted to switch to the healthcare industry because there too, there are major gaps between what we need and what we are currently providing into the workplace.
Just interject a question, Jay.
Yeah.
How do you think we got to where we are in this?
That's part of the gaps.
Yeah, and because that's part of the.
Yeah.
It gets to the issue of how do we solve it? Right?
How do we say yes? And good. Let me get to maybe how we got to it. I'll mix those two together because I think how we solve this takes that partnership. And we've got to involve the schools at a much earlier age. Young people are leaving this region in big numbers. When students graduate high school and decide to go to college, 48% of those high school graduates are going out of state. Part of that is because of the cost of higher education in this state and the discounting that our neighboring states are doing in order to attract our students to join their institutions. We got to get smarter about this. When we put a freeze on tuition at Keene State College, it's something I worked on while I was interim president at the college. I signed up 1,000 advocates to be voices for a tuition freeze in the state. First year it didn't make any difference. They were debating it until June, and students had already made their deposits in May. But the second year, we saw a change. Not only did we get more applicants from in-state, but those that were accepted, we had a much greater percentage of those who were accepted actually enroll. We've got to start forging that alliance and making it clear that the opportunity for higher education at state institutions is something that's broadly accessible. And that includes the community colleges, where while the tuition freeze has been in effect longer, it's probably hurt the number of full-time faculty that they have because it hasn't been fully funded. We've got to start matching up career opportunities and education at a much earlier point in the cycle. We can't wait for high school graduation to let people know that there are careers at reasonable wages available for you in the state, and here's what they are. And that's part of the healthcare issue. You can be an LPN, licensed practical nurse, with 1 year out of college and have a job that pays $37,000 a year. And it's a career track. If you're wanting to continue to move up in that profession, there's a scaffold and a pay scale that goes along with that scaffold. The advanced manufacturing positions are all seeking people at reasonable wages, middle class wages, where people can be starting at that level that I just mentioned and higher. I know because I've known people going through the programs. We know that there are definitely four-year degrees that fill the niche in the marketplace, and we've got, and the STEM initiative in the state is terrific. To graduate more students with baccalaureate degrees, 65% of our population, to try to have 65% of our population in the state credentialed by the year 2025 is something that the New Hampshire Coalition for Business and Education, an entity I'm part of, which is broad-based throughout the state with many manufacturing and different sectors of business and for-profit, as well as the not-for-profits, and education, the Board of Education, bringing them together to try to form a better system that will align education with the job needs in the state and try to retain the businesses we have and the youth that we have to fill the needs of business and not-for-profits.
Jay, I had one more follow-up. So we talk to candidates and we talk to elected officials and we talk to economists, and a lot of the data and the analytics you throw out here are not unfamiliar. With the aging population in our community, the workforce issues and matching up. And you just outlined a couple of things that you express need to occur. But have you gotten to a point where you could imagine or you've contemplated a particular legislative remedy to any of this, so that if you're elected and you go to Concord, you're ready to bring that deal specifically with these issues?
Yes. I mentioned we should consider tuition freeze for community colleges and the university system for the next 2 years. And if we can do it, we should do it for the next 4 years. We should work with business in whatever kind of format that happens to try to encourage loan forgiveness or loan repayment programs as part of the incentive to retain college students in the state. We should try to build an internship network in this state to help high school students and college students see what the careers are and the younger professionals who they are in this state, and make those connections before students leave college. We think of legislation in terms of how does it increase. It's going to increase taxes. It's going to have to take more resources. Some things just take more alignment, and we can bring that about. And some of that is legislative. Government is not a bystander to those initiatives. Government has to work alongside business and industry to provide those kinds of incentives for young employees, young professionals to get into those internship positions, to have some incentives once they take those positions at post-graduate, and that the private sector help support some loan repayment, which is the incentive that we might be able, the private sector could bring. When it comes to licensure in the state, we're very slow on this. You talk to people who are trying to get licensed practical nurses licensed, or people who are in the social services providing counseling services to people who have addictions and substance use issues. Our certification procedure is more complex than in other states. Our licensures take longer than in other states. If it takes legislation to revise those standards and or the sequence by which licensing happens so that we can accelerate it in a manner that other states have done, then we should do that to help fill the vacancies that we have in both of those sectors. There are other, on broadband, you guys ran an article on 5G that came out in a font that was took the magnifying glass to read. As a result, I don't think many people read it. But that was the kind of quantum leap that I've been hoping would arrive in the scene. It's like having created Manhattan. You just got to come up with a new paradigm, and the 5G network, that bandwidth, helps create some possibilities for new paradigms. How will it be licensed? How will government, including local governments, work together with the for-profit sector to deliver more accessible, broader, bigger bandwidths, faster speeds than what we have today? And legislatively, we can help forge that. We can help shape that in the state and form those partnerships.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to just be clear on, when you talk about working with businesses to encourage loan forgiveness, are you talking about
It's loan repayment, I should have said.
Okay.
Loan repayment.
So that would be within New Hampshire specifically, in order to
Yes, if you
make
accept the
the
position.
state more competitive financially for young adults. Is that?
It would be the incentive. I think businesses have, I'm not the genius on this one. Other people have thought of this, that this is a means of having an employee being compensated at the salary 3 years out, that they would be earning 3 years out in their first year, right? I mean, there's a slightly, you get the entering salary, you put a little bit more towards it that helps provide that incentive for their loan repayments, and essentially you're paying more of what the average is for that position, and that's the way it's been articulated by others. Yeah. But it's sort of like Spark New Hampshire. We create commissions in New Hampshire all the time. Spark New Hampshire is an initiative to try to create more equal opportunities for kids in the 0 to 5 age group. Locally, a program that aligns with that is Impact Monadnock. More broadly, New Hampshire Charitable Fund and the Governor's Commission called Spark New Hampshire are all working on similar kinds of initiatives. How do you equalize the opportunities for kids 0 to 5 years old? So that before kids get into kindergarten, we equalize that opportunity. Otherwise, kids begin school with some having had a significant number, as many as 6,000 hours more contact with adults speaking languages, having projects that they do, outdoor activities. A huge gap between those who have and those who have not. And that just immediately is causing, you know, a kid to have some gap in their preparedness for school. You know what so one of the low-hanging fruits that people are going to is we've got to provide better counseling and advising to first-time parents to just explain. It's voices being heard. It's the language being spoken. It's becoming in touch with their environment. This kind of advising frequently happens, right? I mean, you've got new parents are always getting advised about the health care that they need to have while they're for themselves, new mothers, the kids, how diet, and here's how you nurture a kid in the household. So that's part of the delivery.
Jumping to another topic here, dealing with the well-chronicled opioid crisis.
Yeah.
The state has to put its resources into a lot of areas,
Yep.
including education, treatment, counseling, law enforcement. Can you talk a little bit about where your priorities lie relative to this issue?
The solution is going to have three legs to the stool. It's going to have an educational arm or leg. It's going to have a enforcement leg, and it's going to have a treatment leg. Education, I think we've recognized that this needs to begin at an earlier age. We need to begin talking about substance use disorders at an earlier age, because it's often in the household, and kids can't talk about it. And so it needs to be something that is discussed at an earlier age. And I'm not going to put the grade level on it, let educators decide what's most age appropriate. But we're deferring the discussion until kids get into high school, and that's too late. And kids have already been affected by those substance use disorders, either directly or indirectly at earlier ages. Enforcement, I think we need to listen to the enforcement professionals in this state and focus their resources in the places where they can have the greatest impact. And if that is going to take some discussion about decriminalization of some drugs, like marijuana use, then we should have that conversation. I'm not saying that that's legislation I'm absolutely in favor of. Somebody's going to have to put together that legislation so that we can have that conversation. But our resources need to be applied to where the greatest need is. And right now, there are 430 deaths a year, last year, due to fentanyl, heroin, and other severe substances. And we've got to be focusing our attention on those kinds of drug addictions. And then finally, on the treatment side, I think we recognize we have a lack of treatment services in the state and in our healthcare system. Treatment services are often cut off at 30, 60 days. And recovery is something that takes a much longer and sustained effort than just what healthcare systems and health insurance provide. So we've got to look at that broader continuum and consider how are we going to assist people over that period. You talk to people who are in recovery, and 10 years out, they still say, I'm still in recovery. And those people who are in recovery, who are that far into their recoveries, they have a passion for this. So that when we get the community action program that Senator Kelly introduced to the region, that pulls together all of the resources that we've got, law enforcement and the social service agencies and the medical care providers and education, and they start to come together to form a coalition as to how they integrate those services, that's a big deal. Because we're undersupplied, and we've got to align them so that the treatment services continue over a longer period of time. And one of the parties that they're bringing into that are the recovery coaches. And they're an important arm. We need more legs on that table.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned the possible avenues of legalization as a means to fight this, and sort of favorably, but not something that you would push forward or take the lead on. Are there any aspects, just to sort of reiterate what Paul was saying, are there aspects that you would want to take the lead on in terms of this three-legged approach? Is there an aspect that you would take the lead on right into office, for instance? Like the first thing that you think needs to be done in terms of priority?
Education.
So what would your-
I think we have a strong health education program already in place, and we need to be prepared through that education to talk about substance use disorders, and that seems like some low-hanging fruit. Another area of low-hanging fruit does seem on the treatment side, to align these services much more closely. On the law enforcement side, this is a question of, is it going to be more resources? Is the war on drugs working? And what drugs do we need to really to focus our attention on? Because we're losing lives, we're losing families. And for that, I've tried to work. I have talked with a number of law enforcement officials. I'm not going to play the trump card. But they're professionals, and they differ on this question. And they should be part of the advisory group. Another piece of legislation that is very important on this is drug courts. And we've got to make sure that the infrastructure we've put in place on drug courts for alternative sentencing are useful. And the point to that is that you can't just have alternative sentencing without the kind of infrastructure and social services that are necessary to support people who want to go down that path.
Sorry, just to hold you to the enforcement point. I'm trying to see. You said earlier, it seems like you would commission some sort of advisory opinion from law enforcement to decide which way to go in terms of heavier or lighter. Which way do you lean now towards enforcement, more or less, in terms of how much needs to be applied? If you had to.
There are 3 levels of crimes. There are felonies, misdemeanors, and offenses, fines.
Civil violations.
Violations. We treat marijuana in particular as a misdemeanor currently. The small possession. And that, I think, is a debate that needs to be had as to whether that small possession should wind up as a criminal hearing, something that has to go through courts in order to adjudicate. That, I think, is the question that needs to be addressed in a legislative manner. I think.
Do you have a view on it now?
Right, because if it did, then you would have to presumably cast a vote, right?
This depends on the legislation.
Okay.
This really does. I mean, you got to have an age limit. You've got to have appropriate advice and counseling service that's going to be made available. We've got all sorts of laws on substance use relative to alcohol. Are we gonna design this in a manner that treats other illegal substance uses in a similar way? And so I'd be looking at the legislation to see if there are the kinds of controls over abuses of small quantities in the same manner that there are for abuses of alcohol.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to figure out what you would see as being ideal legislation that you would support. So would it be reducing it from violations down to maybe civil offenses, provided there is the right age limits and whatever support you think is necessary? Or I don't want to put words in your mouth. So what would be legislation in this arena that you would support?
I haven't studied this to the extent that a legislator would to cast their vote. I have an inclination to want to see the conversation be had. I think the law enforcement community has been tested, has had this question in front of them for a long period of time, and I think that the state should give consideration to decriminalizing small quantity possession of marijuana. And the details of that legislation, I'm sure, can be discovered through the kinds of legislation that other states have adopted. And that's as far as I'm prepared to go. You asked me. We got here by talking about opioids. We know that those are killing drugs, that they are long-term addictive, and that it's destroying lives. We need to have our services in this state directed towards where our problems are most severe. And if we are misdirecting our resources because our laws are shaped around such a broad breadth of control, then we should consider how do we focus those resources on where the greatest need is. That's my biggest concern. And I think a discussion about decriminalization of small quantities of marijuana that's where we need the law enforcement agencies to raise their attention. We can talk about marijuana as being a gateway drug, but so is alcohol a gateway drug, and we're regulating alcohol in one way and marijuana in another way. And does that continue to make sense today when our problems are much greater? And if there are alternatives, we should consider those.
Since you mentioned allocation of resources, one of the biggest or most prominent roles of the legislature is in budgeting. And there are those who believe that when there are not enough resources going around in state government, that's because we have a revenue problem, and there are others who say it's because we have a spending problem. Where do you fall along those lines? Do you think that the state needs to find new sources of revenue, or needs to take a tougher look at what it's spending on now?
We have a revenue problem. in New Hampshire. On the spending side, we should always be looking for how technologies and how we can draw upon resources from the private sector and not-for-profits in order and to just align ourselves better to save resources. That's just smart business, and to ignore the kinds of changes that happen and that to try to adjust our practices to the experience that other states have had. That's just smart business, and we've got to be smart about the business of government, how we execute our governmental duties. But we also need to be not so focused on our current tax structure and preserving it as it is that we ignore the potential for broadening our revenue opportunities. So I am open to conversations that move us beyond our current dependency on property taxes for such a broad range of services in the state, including school funding, the state's share of school funding, and to try to get to some other forms of revenue for the state that can help address some of our current as well as our future needs.
Such as?
Well, I think some of the ideas that are out there, ideas about an income tax that's set so that there's an excluded floor. And people have thrown numbers out like $50,000, first $50,000 of income would be excluded from any kind of income tax. There are ideas about a low sales tax, because if it was low enough to continue to draw business from out of state, as we do in our border communities, that it would broaden the tax base. There are ideas about capital gains taxing, something that taxes a form of income that's other than wages. These are and then there are ideas for special use taxes that would look at road gap fuel taxes and miles traveled taxes. Essentially, that's an excise tax on certain kinds of vehicles that don't use fuel, electric vehicles. But that's another. Those are ways of user fees that could be applied and accelerate some of the needs of the state, such as repairing the Route 119 bridge in Hinsdale, and some of the road improvements that are needed, like Route 63. These are gateway roads into our state, and we need a way to try to accelerate these projects in order to have a better transportation system in and out of the state.
Sorry, at the risk of being blunt, with almost everything that you've mentioned so far, you've used the phrase, there are ideas. I just want to make absolutely sure, are they your ideas? Is this something that you're going to push? Or are you saying that these are suggestions that you're going to consider when you get into office? And if they're just to consider, do you have any ideas that are firmly yours, or that you firmly want to stake out a position on, saying that you would definitely go into support at this stage?
I'm open to. Let me go here. The state Senate composition is going to change dramatically in this session. There are 8 open seats, and all 24 seats are up for election. The composition of that body is going to be much different when I hope to enter office than what it is today. that group needs to start to come together around the question of how do we provide some property tax relief in this state? How do we create some revenue opportunities to fund some of the most critical needs that we face? If we can agree on the question, we can make progress on the solutions. So I'm prepared to open up those questions.
Okay. Do you see, just to step out broadly from any issue, do you see your role as a senator, I guess, as sort of a policy maker in the sense that you run on a platform with policies, or more just the election is about the individual, not the policies? That might have been awkwardly phrased. Do you see the election of state senator as more about the man or woman in the office, or about the policies themselves? Does that make sense?
Well, I think it's both.
Sure.
Sorry to strike the balance, but if you can't forge a coalition, your idea is dead on arrival.
Okay.
And I don't want to go so far down a path on my best idea that I lose the possibility of the perspective of somebody else to forge a better idea that more people will move towards. I've learned that through my career. You try to get decisions made in a college community where everybody has a voice, and I've done that. But it's by starting the process with a notion of what's the question that we're trying to answer, and what are the goals we're trying to achieve, and then the means by which we get there. We can figure that out. We can probably reach agreement around some things. But if we don't start with the right question and the goals that we're trying to achieve, I don't think the processes we put in place are going to be that useful.
In terms of the things that you would be open to for finding new sources of revenue or different sources of revenue, you talked about a couple of different types of taxes. One of the proposals that keeps coming up that's a slightly different sort of thing is expanded gambling, like creating a new revenue source that the state does not already have. How do you feel about that type of thing?
I have questions about gambling and or the large casino idea as a revenue solution for the state. I think people gamble now with the state lottery. So the state's already in the gambling business. We regulate some poker bars, around the state. I think that, but the discussion about the single casino, I don't know that it has produced a study that is so compelling for revenue generation in the state that, and clearly the legislatures had concerns about moving in that direction. So I share those concerns. But am I open to other proposals around gambling and the kind of revenue that might be generated for it? Yes. But that single solution, I think, has just proven in so many different votes to just not be carrying the day.
Yeah, on a topic not entirely unrelated to the opioid discussion we had a minute ago, but to talk a little bit generally about mental health.
Yeah.
And the legislators over the past few years have really taken some whacks at the Department of Health and Human Services budget, which has led to diminishment of beds, cuts in staff for agencies and hospitals, and this wait list has only grown. As a person maybe heading to Concord, what would you say to, and the wait list probably being more people than not on it, what would you say to those people as somebody who's going to Concord to try to change that?
To the
These are
who
people who have mental health issues, who are suffering or struggling, who are
Yeah.
waitlisted. They don't have a bed, they don't have a place for them to get treatment or help.
Right. We have a mental health problem in the state. We cannot deliver our services to the populations that need it. We can't sustain it over the period of time that they need it. And we're under-resourced. I'm encouraged by the 1115 waiver. If you're familiar with that, it's a Medicaid waiver that is going to bring $150 million for the state to apply over the next 5 years. It's asking for those broad-based coalitions to come together and make creative proposals as to how you're going to deliver mental health services to a broader population. There are 7 regions in the state. Cheshire is one of those, along with Sullivan County and a portion of Grafton. We have some strong voices from this community working on that proposal, and I think we need to listen to those professionals and the ideas that they generate. This is these are a good pool of dollars that we need to apply very strategically to reach goals. I mean, these dollars aren't just free to do what we're currently doing and substitute for the funds that we're, moving around the chessboard. That's not the game. The game is to have more people in the kind of services that they need and coming out of the difficulties that they face. I want to tell you a little bit of a story along this line, just to show some of the way that I've thought about the problem. Locally, with the community service agencies that are funded through the city, it's around $280,000 a year. I helped push the amendment to add some dollars to the homeless shelter, 100 to the community kitchen, and to Meals on Wheels this year, in this current year. As I spoke to that addition, I challenged the city manager to set some goals for this funding. That it's not enough to put the Band-Aid on income and housing and food insecurity. It's not enough to put the Band-Aid on. We've got to get to the root cause problem. People don't elect to have income insecurity and homelessness and food insecurities. They fall into those situations because of other problems that they've experienced in their lives. And we're not making the connections between these agencies and the kinds of services that they need in order to achieve a goal. The goal ought to be people aren't income insecure, they aren't homeless, and they aren't food insecure. These are those basic needs and so we've got to find what are the root causes that resulted in the situation, and how do people achieve success and get themselves further away from whatever that problem was. We've got a health record that we can share now with our healthcare providers. But there is no such thing for mental health services. And I understand HIPAA and privacy concerns, but if we're going to be delivering services to people in need need to help provide some information that can be more broadly shared across agencies that are trying to deliver the helpful services to address the root cause issues. So I'm prepared to start down that path with mental health service providers to see how we can link their services more closely together and align them without spending more resources, just do a better job of connecting people to the services that they need.
In terms of wanting to broaden that access to information, and kind of where the kind of built-in stigma that there is to mental health that doesn't necessarily go along with physical health, do you think that the Attorney General's stance on tying background checks for guns to the New Hampshire Health Protection Plan and mental health patients would set that back?
So, another parallel kind of situation that I'm more familiar with versus the State Attorney General's position, no fly, no guns, makes a lot of sense to me. We should be doing better background checks on people who are buying guns. We should also consider training so that people know proper storage and proper uses of the weapons that they are intending to acquire and possess.
Just to fill in then, the specific criticism of this by gun rights activists is that it is specifically talking about people who are seeking mental health, and not necessarily the list that you're talking about, but when it comes to background checks, people who may have checked into a facility for some sort of had some sort of appointment, or and the worry is that they will end up on these lists, and that the Attorney General's direction that the Medicaid law should be interpreted in this way will cause these people to end up. So with regard to
our State Attorney General.
Yes.
yeah, so with regard to the guns and the issue and the as you were talking about the need for more background checks, where do you see mental health issues as playing into that? I guess would be the question.
I don't think I've considered that question adequately.
Well, it has kind of flown a little bit under the radar in terms of his stance. But you were starting to talk a little bit about some proposals you feel might be advisable on curbing gun violence generally. And so these are things that you feel the state specifically should have a role in, that as a legislator you might put forth or support.
I think gun violence in the country has risen to a level where we can't ignore how our laws line up with the kinds of violence that we've observed. And I hope that there are people who have strong feelings on this. Let them be known as to what the kinds of changes we ought to be making. I think the debate that I've heard in Congress about controlling online sales, gun show sales, having background checks that are thorough before the point of sale takes place makes sense. So to the extent that the federal law should define this, because what happens in one state really ought to, these kinds of differences across states clearly it could be resolved by federal legislation, and that makes a lot of sense to me. But to the extent that it doesn't occur, we do probably have a lot of laws on the books in New Hampshire relative to the acquisition of guns, and we ought to be stepping up on reviewing those. with a goal. I mean, what's our goal? Our goal is to allow people to possess guns and for society to be safe under in light of those laws. Can't we bring that into an alignment?
Jay, do you favor repealing the death penalty?
Yes.
Well, in the interest of getting you out of here on time, I won't go into like every possible configuration, but given your specific background, you talked a little bit earlier about the need to address the level of college debt that young people are graduating with and the cost of education. Where are savings to be had? I mean, it's one thing to say, well, we're going to freeze tuitions, but New Hampshire's tuitions are, the cost of an education at UNH for a New Hampshire student is roughly equal to the cost of education at a private university for someone anyplace else in the country. What are concrete steps that the state can take, or the university system might take to help contain the cost of education?
I think the thing you first want to look at is, are the administrative efficiencies in place? We have, so we need to make sure that on procurement policies and administrative structures and the uses of information systems, that we try to bring those into alignment. And even if there are also efficiencies that can be had between the community college system and the university system, and how they collaborate and dovetail their programs and their uses of information systems and their procurement to get a greater bulk of procurement. They can. So I think those are some areas that colleges and universities can pursue. I'll also, though, defend those institutions as being some of the most cost-effective among their peers in the country. And it is common for a state to make investments in education, in higher education, as a means of attracting the kind of creative economies that we want in this state. So I'm not saying to freeze tuition and then short those institutions. I'm saying when we freeze the tuition, we need to make sure that those institutions are supported and to be competitive with their peers. The community college system is the highest tuition in the nation. The state, UNH is expensive compared to its peers. And Plymouth and Keene likewise are expensive to their peers, but not as expensive as the private sector. They've held down the costs well. I mean, you can go to Keene State as an in-state student at $25,000 a year. That's not a private institution tuition. And it's fairly competitive, and the quality is superb. So I don't think we want to deny the citizens of our state quality education. We want to provide them access that's comparable to the kind of access that's available in other states. And for that, we're going to need to look at the public investment in higher education and not make it a constant battleground and see it as an asset towards economic development, not a detraction.
So you talked about that in terms of looking at it. Obviously, it's a lot different when you go beyond a city council role or a board member role. When you get into a highly partisan, politicized environment, I guess what would you what would be your approach to trying to build these consensus that you've brought up on a lot of these issues in terms of funding or a lot of these issues can be quite divisive. So do you see, what would be, I guess, your approach, and how do you think these issues are best found common ground on as a senator?
To be open and accessible to your colleagues. And you've got to spend time in what they're interested in. And I'm not saying just across party line. I mean, within the party line. Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how this Senate majority plays out. It's significant. I mean, that it's an important issue. Which party is placing 3 members on a committee of 5? That is a big decision. So where the state goes and where the majority of the Senate goes is huge. But to always think in terms of a party when you're only 24 people is really denying the intellect that there is for people on the opposite side. And I'm not about that. Good ideas are going to come from people on both sides, and we need to respect each other and try to encourage the support of people broad-based. One of the biggest disincentives of locating in the state can be that every time there's a change in the political winds, that we're constantly reversing the laws that the previous legislature put in place. That won't serve the state well at all. So we've got to be considerate of not just where party allegiance vote may be, but also are we going to be able to write legislation that can draw the interests of the other party.
Jay, you talked earlier a little bit about infrastructure as an important issue, and the State Department of Transportation's 10-year plan is perpetually behind. What can be done to begin to make a dent in some of these red-listed projects, some of which are right here in this region?
Yes. Well, I think we just missed an opportunity with our fuel prices to look at the fuel tax and raise it a notch. I don't know what notch and how big that leap is, but fuel prices are at 25-year lows, and we should have been more progressive in our thinking about that. I will certainly want to ask that question of my colleagues and the State Department of Transportation. What would be that meaningful step for us to take to make greater progress on the 10-year plan? We have needs locally, and we need to address them. Yeah.
So fuel is kind of leads into energy.
Yep.
New
Thanks.
Hampshire has, huh?
Thanks for going there.
New
I actually
Hampshire,
wanted that question.
really? New Hampshire has among the highest energy costs in the nation, and there's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of years about how to do something about that, whether it's natural gas infrastructure projects, transmission lines, hydro. Do we put more into renewable sources? So what's your thinking on this, and what do you think the state's role should be? Obviously, as a council, the Keene Council had some things to say about the the two major gas pipeline projects that would come through this or near the state. Should the state have more of a role than it does in dealing with those types of projects? And what do you think in terms of energy overall? Where should we be heading?
Yeah, I think I'm concerned about living in the state of no. That every proposal that comes up, we're going to say no. It seems like we're concerned on the net metering side as to how quickly we grow solar and other water producing or natural resources that can be applied to the energy grid. So we cap how much production we can put on those distribution lines. We say no to pipelines. We have the Northern Pass project. We've got to find some things that we're willing to say yes to, and let those industries make some progress. I think the easiest ones to try to look at is the natural resources. It's something that is so much a part of our state, the preservation of natural resources, that our uses of solar, wind, and water-powered electricity production just seems to fit a model for this state, and we've got to find the ways to encourage it. And if it grows faster than what the caps we put on it, then we should think about how we remove those caps and take the legislature out of the decision-making game on the how quickly natural resources are brought into the equation. I think that the legislature will probably exercise some voice on the Northern Pass project. It right now is under site review. I believe 70% of the pipeline's going to be underground, and I guess the question is how much of it is practical to put underground and still have the project work. But it is, and we need to verify that in fact it is the kind of fuel source that's going to be as reliable for this state as it's advertised. But if we can go through those verifications, and that's something that I think the legislature should stay away from, is the verification process. And there are professionals who can evaluate the site, the costs, and the actual production and output and gain that can come from it. So I think it will be interesting to see how the PUC and site evaluation committees exercise their roles on that project. It's taken a long time.
So, Jay, we've had a good session. Was there anything that we didn't talk about that you had hoped to maybe talk about?
Well, let me just spend some time on income insecurity and just my concerns, my roots, and I think the economy. I think people do feel left behind in the kind of economic changes that have occurred over the last 8 years. And I think we need to pay attention to that, both at national as well as state policies. It's why the economy and economic growth is so important to me. And it's not just so that we can continue to foster growth on the upper ends of the wage scale. We've got to be concerned about people on all ends of the wage scale. We've got to be concerned about matching up people with middle-class income jobs. And that's why the education and job pipeline are so important to me, because I think there are pathways for good-paying middle-class income jobs in the state of New Hampshire that are going unfilled, because we don't have a good alignment of students' perception of the work, of schools' preparation for students to be ready for the work, and for the worker, the employers to have had the contact with those labor pools to try to encourage them into those positions. And I also think that we need to be concerned about livable wages. And whether, and so for instance, we do not have a wage law the minimum wage law in the state of New Hampshire. We are tethered ourselves to the federal minimum wage. I don't think that serves our state well. And I think it is putting us in a competitive disadvantage compared to the states that we border in this region, Massachusetts and Vermont, both of which have a higher minimum wage, $9.60 in Vermont and $10 an hour in Massachusetts. So I think that a minimum wage law is something that the state of New Hampshire should elect to act upon.
Do you have a sense for what level it should be? Is it a competitive thing?
I think the talking about how competitive we are with our bordering states is a place that a Cheshire County legislator ought to be talking from. So, that's my position. And we should be looking at those neighboring states into this region and be concerned that our minimum wage is not in line.
Wishing you were speaking at a convention this week?
There was the greatest line. Cory Booker is the Barack
Oh, yeah.
Obama of this convention. His line about if you're gonna run fast, run alone. If you're gonna run far, run together. It's not a bad metaphor for running for state senate. Honestly.
Gotta get that on the back of your card and just source it.
Yeah. You might suggest that, but you go down the hallways of Keene High School, and you'll find India Lawrence's classroom. It's a junior English class, and she's got the 7 traits of successful people on her doorway, and those traits include vision, creativity, openness to creativity, optimism, and persistence. If you look at my life and my background, my credits, you'll see I have those traits. I have the vision and creativity and the openness to work together with people. I have a positive attitude that where I'm going to apply my efforts is going to be better for the citizens of this county and this state. And I have the persistence to get things done, and you can see that in my track record with every organization I've ever joined that's put me in a leadership position. That's why I'm running, is to do something on behalf of my fellow citizens in this region. And your support would mean a great deal. I value this institution of the Sentinel that has served our region so long, that this is not just important to this election, obviously, that's without saying, but the credibility that your paper has and that it could align with my candidacy, I would value a great deal. I've been supported by Senator Molly Kelly, who I think has done a terrific job in her role as a constituent advocate for this region. I've been endorsed by 12 state representatives. 2 of them who's now supporting me are my opponents. and one person I can't explain, who just hasn't endorsed anybody. And among my fellow city councilors, at least one candidate has served that body for a long time, and with many of those city councilors, 11 of the 14, I'm the 15th, and the mayor and the past mayor, Dale Prejean, 11 of those 14 have indicated their support for me. So people who have worked with my opponents in the Democratic primary see me as the kind of candidate that they would like to have in the Senate, who will be most effective in working on their behalf and the citizens' behalf, and who will work with them effectively. And I see those roles, and I value their endorsement and support as well. So that's where I want to make sure I got a couple last pointers in.
Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much.